The street was deserted when Nathan Carter parked his car. The building in front of him loomed like a shadow against the overcast sky. The worn concrete looked more like a scar than a structure. Broken windows, some boarded up, failed to hide the echoes of abandonment. Nathan turned off the engine and grabbed his audio recorder from the passenger seat. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. He was a skeptic, but even skeptics needed stories that sold. And this one was perfect. Recording Nathan Carter, he began, pressing the record button. Date, October 14th. Location, 23rd Avenue, building number 426. Known as the Building of the Disappeared. Today, we're going to find out if the stories are true. He adjusted the backpack on his shoulders, double-checking his gear, flashlight, pocket knife, extra recorder batteries. Everything seemed in order. The building's main entrance was sealed with a rusty chain, but he already knew the way and was through the side. Reports from other explorers mentioned a broken window on the ground floor, easy to crawl through. The air there felt different. Cold and still, as if time had abandoned the place along with its former occupants. Nathan crouched and climbed through the window, landing on a cracked tiled floor. The weak beam of his flashlight revealed graffiti-covered walls streaked with water stains. The emptiness pressed down on him, every sound echoing in layers he couldn't quite understand. On the first floor, nothing seemed particularly strange. Old furniture and scattered papers hinted at lives once lived here. He found a dark hallway leading to a staircase. As he approached, he noticed footprints in the dust, as if someone had walked through recently. His heart raced, but he took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Footprints, he whispered into the recorder. Someone's been here not too long ago. I'm not alone. I need to stay alert. Nathan climbed the first flight of stairs. His footsteps were muffled, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. With each step, it felt as though something was pulling him deeper into the structure. It was as if the building itself had a presence, a pulse, breathing down his neck. Reaching the second floor, Nathan paused to survey his surroundings. The hallway stretched long, lit only by the beam of his flashlight. Metal doors lined both sides, most of them ajar. He hesitated, but curiosity won out. The first door he opened revealed an empty room, save for a wooden chair in the center with one broken leg. He mentally filed it as odd, but not unexpected. As he turned to leave, something caught his attention. A faint creak, like wood shifting, came from one of the rooms further down the hall. He froze. The flashlight flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw a shadow move. Nathan focused the beam in that direction, but the hallway was empty. Just a coincidence, he murmured, trying to sound confident into the recorder. Probably just the building reacting to the weather or my presence. Nothing more. He kept moving. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air were thickening. The silence was nearly complete, interrupted only by the occasional distant creak he preferred not to investigate. At the end of the hallway, Nathan found another staircase leading to the third floor. Before ascending, he noticed something peculiar on one of the doors, a red X painted with what looked like faded spray paint. He snapped a photo of the symbol, mentally noting to investigate it later. At the third floor, he stopped to catch his breath. The atmosphere here felt different. It wasn't just the smell of mold that bothered him, but something deeper, a sense that this place shouldn't exist. The air was colder, even with the building fully sealed. Nathan forced himself to ignore the unease and focused on his next objective, finding any clues about who might still be using the building. He came across a room filled with scattered papers, most of them ruined by moisture. But among the mess, something stood out, a black-covered journal. It was intact, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. Nathan picked it up and opened to the first page. The letters were smudged, but a few words were still legible. "They're watching me. I need to get out of here." The journal contained short but unsettling entries. One page mentioned unexplainable sounds. Another described doors opening on their own. The final entry, however, gave Nathan pause. "If you've made it this far, don't trust what you've seen. Don't look back." He read the words repeatedly, trying to make sense of them. They didn't make any logical sense, yet he couldn't ignore the weight they carried. For a moment, he felt the urge to glance over his shoulder, but he resisted. He tucked the journal into his backpack and decided to press on. With the flashlight in hand and adrenaline coursing through him, Nathan knew this was just the beginning. The mystery was more alive than he'd imagined, and the building, somehow, seemed to react with every step he took. Nathan climbed slowly to the next floor, feeling that each step dragged him deeper into the enigma surrounding the building. The journal in his backpack felt heavier than its physical weight, burdened by the final warning etched into its pages: "Don't trust what you've seen. Don't look back." He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia from a mind pushed too far, but the growing sense of being watched clung to him like a second skin. The fourth floor was even more deteriorated. Cracks ran deep through the walls, the ceiling sagged in places, and the floor was covered with a fine layer of dust, broken only by marks where something had recently been dragged. Nathan shone his flashlight over the tracks and followed them to a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar and faintly illuminated from within. Inside, the weak moonlight filtered through a broken window, casting eerie shadows across the room. The remnants of furniture sat beneath rotting sheets, and in the middle of the room was a single wooden table with a chair tucked neatly underneath. On the table sat a mug, its contents long since decayed into a moldy sludge. Nathan hesitated, the scene unnervingly fresh despite the decay. He clicked on his recorder. "Fourth floor. I've entered a room that seems to have been recently occupied. There are clear signs of use, a mug left behind, furniture that's been shifted. Something here feels off." As he finished, a faint noise sent a chill through him. It was a creaking sound, followed by the soft metallic clang of something hitting the floor. Nathan spun toward the door but found only darkness. His flashlight wavered slightly as he scanned the hallway. Stepping cautiously into the corridor, he traced the sound to its source and found a key lying on the floor. It was small and plain, with a faint layer of rust coating its edges. The key hadn't been there before. He picked it up, rolling it in his fingers as a mixture of intrigue and unease welled up. He approached the door closest to where the key had fallen. The handle was cold and resistant, but the key slid in smoothly, turning with a satisfying click. Pushing the door open, Nathan stepped into a room that was smaller than expected, claustrophobic in its proportions. The walls were plastered with photographs and documents, some yellowed with age while others seemed freshly printed. Each photo depicted people in various states of unease, some smiling nervously, others frozen mid-panic. Many were unfamiliar, but their surroundings were not. They had all been taken inside this building. At the center of the room was a tripod-mounted camera, pointed directly at the door he had just entered. It was an older model, coated in dust yet still intact. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. Why would someone set this up? And how long had it been there? He moved to the desk beneath the photographs, scanning its scattered contents. Among the papers, he found a transcript of what appeared to be an interview or observation notes. Subject appears agitated. Increased paranoia noted after 2 hours of isolation. Recommended observation continuation. Nathan's stomach churned. These weren't just random photographs or notes. Someone had been monitoring people who came here, watching them, studying them. He flipped through more papers and found scribbled lines repeating over and over, "They're always watching. They're always watching." A sudden burst of static filled the room, startling him. The camera had turned on by itself, emitting a faint hum as it activated. Nathan approached cautiously, peering into the lens, but it shut off again before he could examine it closely. The air felt thicker as he stepped out of the room, gripping his flashlight tightly. The silence was back, oppressive and stifling, but it wasn't the comforting kind. It felt alive, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Further down the hallway, he noticed a faint glimmer on one of the walls. He moved closer, finding a crudely drawn symbol etched in what appeared to be red paint. The symbol was unrecognizable, a chaotic mix of geometric shapes. Nathan traced his fingers over its rough surface, wondering if it was another marker left behind by someone before him. He continued up the staircase to the 5th floor, the faint sound of his steps echoing around him. This floor felt different. It was darker, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. The smell of dampness was stronger here, mingling with a faint metallic tang that made Nathan uneasy. He moved cautiously through the hallway, his flashlight illuminating one door after another. Each bore marks of time, rust, scratches, and in some cases, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. One particular door caught his attention. It had been shut tightly, but there were visible handprints on its surface, as if someone had pressed against it in desperation. Opening it slowly, Nathan found himself in what appeared to be another observation room. A single chair sat in the center, its arms lined with faded strips of duct tape. The floor beneath it was darkened with stains he didn't want to examine too closely. Nearby, a piece of paper rested on a small table, its edges curled and brittle. He picked it up and read the scribbled note, "They won't stop. Even if you stay quiet, they'll still find you." Nathan recorded his findings in a low voice, his words trembling slightly. 5th floor. More evidence of activity. There's a chair in the center of the room with restraints, and the floor is stained. Whoever was here before didn't leave willingly. The paranoia, it's creeping in, even for me. The sound of footsteps broke his concentration. They were faint but distinct, coming from the staircase he had just ascended. He turned off the flashlight and pressed his back to the wall, trying to silence his breathing. The steps grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Nathan stayed motionless for what felt like minutes before daring to move. When he turned the flashlight back on, the hallway was empty. He pressed forward, determined not to let fear paralyze him. At the far end of the hallway, he found another staircase. This one led to the 6th floor. As he stepped onto the first step, he glanced back briefly, half expecting to see someone, or something, behind him. But there was only darkness. He climbed, his pulse racing, knowing that whatever waited above was far more sinister than anything he'd encountered so far. Nathan ascended to the 5th floor with cautious, measured steps. His mind buzzed with fragments of thoughts, but none of them provided any clarity. Every room, every hallway, felt more like a maze designed to confuse and break him down. The journal's cryptic warning continued to echo in his mind, "Don't trust what you've seen. Don't look back." The building seemed to feed off his unease, amplifying every creak, every shadow, until they became unbearable. Upon reaching the 5th floor, he found the atmosphere drastically different from the others. This floor was less decayed, and the air felt a bit warmer, almost stale. The hallway stretched long, but the walls had been freshly painted. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed incessantly, casting an eerie, unnatural glow. As Nathan stepped further inside, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the hum of the lights. A sharp, faint sound echoed from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway, something metallic scraping against the floor. Nathan froze, his heart beating faster. He wasn't alone, and the hairs on his neck stood on end. His grip tightened around the flashlight as he made his way toward the source of the noise. The door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar. As he pushed it open, Nathan was greeted by the sight of a small, dimly lit room. The only piece of furniture in the room was an old wooden chair, set in front of a table. The table was covered in papers, some of which were hastily piled, others scattered in disarray. A set of heavy chains lay on the floor beside the chair. It was a setup Nathan had seen before, restraint tools. He stepped forward, his foot catching on something. Looking down, he noticed a worn, leather-bound book lying on the floor. He picked it up, the pages yellowed with age. Flipping through the pages, he found a series of names written in a flowing script, followed by notes on their mental state. One particular entry stood out. Subject 57 exhibits extreme paranoia after 48 hours in isolation. Symptoms worsen upon being placed in the chair. Subject requested immediate termination of the test. Recommendation: keep subject under observation for further analysis. Nathan felt a chill run through him as he read the note. The chair in front of him, the chains on the floor, he knew this was where the tests had taken place. Someone had been held here, monitored, pushed to their breaking point. And then forgotten. He shoved the book into his bag, knowing that this wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a site of psychological experimentation. A test ground for the mind, with people like him caught in its web. The more Nathan uncovered, the more questions it raised. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answers anymore, but he was too far in now. The room grew colder. He could almost feel the eyes on him, watching from unseen corners. He reached for the door, but as his hand touched the handle, another sound, closer this time, made him freeze. Footsteps. They were faint at first, echoing down the hallway. Nathan's pulse quickened. He had to act quickly. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and he stepped back into the corridor, eyes darting to the stairs that led up to the 6th floor. He had to keep moving. The footsteps grew louder. Someone, or something, was near. Nathan hurried toward the stairs, casting one last glance over his shoulder. The hallway behind him was empty, but the sound of footsteps remained. Reaching the stairs, Nathan began to ascend, each step louder than the last. His mind raced. What was this place? Why had it been left untouched, and who was still watching him? There were so many unanswered questions, and with every step, he felt closer to the truth. But he was also aware that the truth might be something far worse than he could ever imagine. On the 6th floor, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Temperature had dropped even more, and the air felt damp, like the building was holding its breath. The walls here were covered in old peeling wallpaper, some areas exposed, revealing the bare bricks beneath. The staircase leading up was steep, and Nathan hesitated before taking another step. Something about the 6th floor felt different from the others. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer just an observer, that he had become part of the experiment itself. As he moved down the hall, a faint smell lingered in the air, a metallic scent that reminded him of blood. Nathan covered his nose and mouth with the sleeve of his jacket, trying to block it out, but it only seemed to grow stronger. He followed the smell, his feet dragging as if the weight of the building was pulling him down. At the end of the hallway, he found another room, the door cracked open. The faint light from the hallway spilled inside, revealing a set of monitors. The screens flickered on and off, showing various rooms within the building. The image on the largest screen caught Nathan's attention. He was on it. His image, recorded from the moment he entered the building, played across the screen. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen any cameras. Had they been watching him this entire time? He stepped into the room, his flashlight scanning the monitors one by one. Each screen showed different angles, capturing his movements with unsettling precision. The images were not live, but they were eerily up to date, as if someone had been recording his every step. "What the hell?" Nathan muttered, his voice a mix of disbelief and horror. He stepped closer to the monitors, trying to understand the setup. The room was filled with old equipment, tapes, wires, and a desk covered with papers. As he sifted through them, one paper caught his eye, a list of names, each followed by a number. The names were all familiar: Eric Williams, Margaret Turner, and others he had seen in the journal. And then, under their names, a chilling note: subject failed. Termination necessary. Nathan stumbled back, the blood draining from his face. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut: this wasn't just some abandoned building. It was a prison, a trap designed to break people mentally and physically. He was being watched, and not by accident. Everything had been planned, every move he made, every decision he took, it had all been anticipated. As Nathan turned to leave, the unmistakable sound of footsteps reached his ears again. Closer this time. He turned the flashlight off and pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and Nathan held his breath. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours, but the sound of footsteps faded away. He waited, listening, but there was nothing. Slowly, he stepped toward the door, ready to continue. The 6th floor had more to reveal, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled deeper into something far darker than he could ever have imagined. Nathan climbed the staircase leading to the 7th floor, his body tense and his mind clouded with unease. The building felt alive, as though it was responding to his every step. His flashlight flickered slightly, its beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. Each floor felt like a layer of some intricate trap, designed to push him further into its depths. The 7th floor was unlike anything he had encountered so far. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and every sound he made seemed to echo endlessly. The walls were lined with objects that didn't belong together: a porcelain doll with cracked features, an antique pocket watch, a dusty pair of eyeglasses. The random collection felt deliberate, as though someone had carefully placed them there for a reason Nathan couldn't understand. "What is all this?" he muttered under his breath, sweeping the flashlight over the bizarre assortment. He pulled out his recorder. 7th floor. The environment has changed again. Objects are scattered throughout the hallway, personal items from different eras. A doll that looks over a century old, a watch from the mid-1900s, whoever arranged this wanted them to be found. Nathan crouched to examine the doll more closely. Its glassy eyes stared blankly ahead, its chipped paint giving it an eerie, weathered appearance. He reached out to touch it but hesitated, the overwhelming sense that he was being watched freezing him in place. Shaking the thought off, he stood and moved further down the hallway. At the end of the corridor, a faint murmuring sound stopped him in his tracks. It was low and indistinct, like several voices speaking at once, their words blending into a dissonant hum. Nathan followed the sound through a room with its door ajar. The murmuring grew louder as he approached, and his heartbeat quickened. Pushing the door open, he found himself in a small room with bare walls. The only furniture was a table, and sitting on it was an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. The voices emanated from the spinning reels, growing louder as Nathan stepped inside. He hesitated before pressing the stop button, cutting off the sound. The abrupt silence was deafening. The walls of the room were covered with yellowing documents, pinned haphazardly with rusted nails. Nathan scanned the papers, his flashlight revealing phrases that made his stomach churn. Subject 14, complete breakdown after 72 hours. Test terminated. No retrieval. These weren't random notes, they were records of people. Subjects. Victims. Nathan stepped closer to read the details of one document. The name at the top caught his attention: Margaret Turner. He'd seen her name on the list from the 6th floor. The notes described Margaret's descent into paranoia, detailing how the isolation and psychological manipulation drove her to the brink. The final entry read, "Subject entered the upper floors. Status, unknown." Nathan's grip on the flashlight tightened. These weren't just stories or urban legends. Real people had been taken here, pushed to their limits, and then discarded. He stuffed several of the papers into his bag, knowing they were evidence. On the table, next to the reel-to-reel recorder, was a photograph. It depicted a group of people standing outside the building, their faces stern and emotionless. Nathan immediately recognized one of them, Richard Hargrove, the man whose name had appeared in the notes. "What the hell were you doing here?" Nathan whispered, holding the photo closer. Before he could analyze it further, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, snapping him out of his thoughts. He spun around, flashlight beam darting across the doorway. The sound had come from the direction he had just walked. He stepped cautiously back into the hallway, his pulse racing. The once silent corridor now seemed alive with subtle noises, faint creaks, the distant shuffle of feet, and a low, almost imperceptible hum. Nathan's mind screamed at him to leave, but he pressed forward, driven by the need to uncover the truth. At the far end of the hallway, he found another door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, he entered a larger room filled with more equipment, monitors, cameras, and recording devices, all old but still functional. Most of the monitors displayed static, but one caught his eye immediately. It was showing a live feed of the hallway outside. Nathan stared at the screen, watching as the camera panned slowly from one end of the corridor to the other. He saw himself standing in the room, the angle capturing him perfectly. "How is this possible?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Nathan glanced around the room, searching for the camera that had been tracking him, but he couldn't find it. The monitor flickered, and for a brief moment, the screen showed something else, a shadowy figure standing just outside the room. He spun around, pointing the flashlight toward the doorway, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, its silence now deafening. Breathing heavily, Nathan returned to the equipment, his hands trembling as he rifled through the papers scattered across the desk. They were blueprints of the building, each floor meticulously labeled. Scribbled notes filled the margins, observation points, sound triggers, behavioral analysis. This building wasn't abandoned, it was a trap. Every room, every object, every sound had been designed to manipulate and observe whoever entered. Nathan pocketed the blueprints and moved toward the exit. But as he reached the doorway, he heard it again, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from the direction he needed to go. He turned off his flashlight, pressing himself against the wall and holding his breath. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, each beat feeling louder than the last. Seconds passed. Then a minute. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Nathan finally dared to peek around the corner. The hallway was empty again, but the tension lingered. He didn't wait to see if the footsteps would return. Moving quickly but quietly, he made his way to the staircase at the end of the hallway. The ascent to the next floor felt heavier, each step an effort as if the building itself were trying to hold him back. Nathan reached the 8th floor, pausing to catch his breath. Whatever was waiting for him above, he knew it would be worse than anything he had encountered so far. But there was no turning back. Nathan ascended to the 8th floor, his steps growing heavier with every step. The air seemed thicker here, pressing against his chest with an oppressive weight. His flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He tightened his grip on the light, as if holding onto it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The corridor was narrower than the ones below, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper in faded floral patterns. The scent of mildew was stronger here, mingling with a faint metallic tang that sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. As he stepped forward, he noticed something different about the air. It felt warmer, almost suffocating. Halfway down the corridor, a single chair sat in the center. Nathan's stomach churned as he approached it. The chair was equipped with leather straps on the arms and legs, the kind used to restrain someone. Next to it was a clipboard with a few papers attached, the ink faded but still legible. He picked up the clipboard, shining his flashlight on the scrawled notes. Subject 041. Isolation endurance, 3 days. Signs of increasing paranoia observed. Recommendation: terminate test immediately. Nathan set the clipboard back down, his hands trembling. Who were these subjects? What were they being tested for? He couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were far worse than he could imagine. Snapping a photo of the clipboard with his phone, Nathan moved further down the corridor, his steps echoing faintly. The floor beneath him creaked with every step, amplifying the tension already coiled tightly in his chest. At the far end, he found another room, its door ajar. Inside was a cluster of old equipment, monitors, recorders, and what appeared to be a rudimentary surveillance system. Dust coated most of the machines, but the setup was unmistakable. This had been a control room, likely used to monitor the subjects being tested. Nathan approached one of the monitors, its screen dark and lifeless. A microphone sat on a nearby desk, connected to a speaker system. He pressed his fingers against the dusty microphone, wondering what kinds of messages had been transmitted through it. Commands? Warnings? He didn't want to dwell on it. As he scanned the room, his flashlight illuminated a key lying on the desk. It was plain, unmarked, but Nathan felt an unexplainable pull toward it. Picking it up, he examined it briefly before pocketing it. The silence around him was suddenly broken by a faint humming sound. Nathan whipped around, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim room. The sound grew louder, reverberating through the walls. It wasn't coming from the equipment, it was coming from somewhere deeper within the floor. Nathan stepped out into the corridor, the key clinking faintly in his pocket. His breathing was shallow, each exhale misting the cold air. Following the sound, he found himself in front of a door marked with the number 817. The key in his pocket seemed to grow heavier as he pulled it out. His hand shook as he inserted it into the lock, the faint click of the mechanism echoing in the stillness. The door creaked open, revealing a room that felt untouched by time. The space was eerily pristine. Clothes were folded neatly on a chair, shoes aligned perfectly against the wall, and a suitcase sat open on the bed. It was as if whoever had been there had intended to leave but never got the chance. Nathan's eyes fell on the suitcase. Inside, a passport and train tickets rested on top of the packed belongings. He picked up the passport, flipping it open. The name inside sent a chill through him: Eric Williams. Eric, Nathan whispered, remembering the notes and recordings he'd found earlier. This was one of the missing people. He flipped through the passport, finding no further clues, and placed it back in the suitcase. As he moved to leave, his flashlight illuminated something scrawled on the far wall in large, bold letters: "You are next." Nathan stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The letters were painted in deep red, their edges dripping as if freshly written. His instincts screamed at him to leave immediately, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the message. Suddenly, the faint hum from earlier grew louder, morphing into distinct footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and heading straight for him. Nathan turned off his flashlight, plunging himself into darkness, and pressed his back against the wall. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Nathan held his breath, gripping the flashlight so tightly that his knuckles ached. For a moment, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. The door creaked slightly, but no one entered. After a few agonizing seconds, the footsteps resumed, fading into the distance. Nathan exhaled shakily, waiting a few more moments before turning his flashlight back on. He stepped out into the corridor, his movements careful and deliberate. The silence had returned, but it felt heavier now, as though the building itself were watching him. Reaching the end of the hallway, Nathan found another staircase leading upward. He hesitated for a moment, looking back over his shoulder. The corridor stretched behind him, empty and still, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond his vision. Turning back, he gritted his teeth and started climbing. Each step felt like a small victory, a defiance against whatever force wanted him to stop. The air grew colder with every step, the walls seeming to close in around him. When he reached the landing for the 9th floor, Nathan paused. He knew he was heading deeper into danger, but turning back was no longer an option. Clutching his flashlight tightly, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever waited for him above. Nathan climbed the staircase to the 9th floor, his legs heavy with exhaustion and his mind swimming with unease. Every step seemed to echo louder, reverberating through the building as if the structure itself was aware of his presence. The cold air wrapped around him like a vice, tightening with each passing moment. When he reached the top, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. The corridor before him was unlike any he had encountered. It was pristine, almost polished, with walls painted a stark white and a plush red carpet covering the floor. The sterile atmosphere was unsettling, a stark contrast to the decay of the lower floors. Nathan hesitated before stepping forward. The corridor stretched long, lit by bright fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. He noticed something at the far end, a polished wooden table with a framed photograph sitting at its center. His flashlight swept over the area, revealing no immediate threats. Gathering his courage, Nathan moved cautiously down the hall toward the table. The photograph was black and white, depicting a group of people standing outside the building. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, men and women in formal attire, their faces neutral. Then his eyes locked onto a familiar figure in the image, Richard Hargrove. The man from the documents and records. Nathan's stomach churned as he studied the photo more closely. Behind the group, in one of the windows of the building, a dark figure could be seen. Its features were indistinct, but its presence was chilling, as though it had been watching the group even then. Nathan pocketed the photo and turned his attention back to the corridor. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors stood, imposing and solid, with a keypad on the wall beside them. As he approached, the keypad's small screen flickered, and a faint voice crackled through a hidden speaker. "Welcome, Nathan Carter," the voice said, metallic and calm. "You've reached the final stage." Nathan's heart pounded as he scanned the area, searching for the source of the voice. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What is this place? What do you want from me?" The voice ignored his questions. "The doors will open. Step inside." A loud click echoed as the double doors unlocked and slowly swung open. Behind them was a vast room bathed in a cold, fluorescent light. Nathan's pulse quickened as he stepped forward, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center, its metal surface gleaming under the harsh lights. Wires and sensors hung from the chair, connected to monitors lining the walls. The screens flickered, displaying various angles of the building, staircases, hallways, rooms Nathan had passed through. Each screen showed recordings of him in different moments, as though every step had been observed. "This is insane," Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the monitors. The metallic voice returned, emanating from speakers hidden in the walls. "You've done well, Nathan. Better than most. That is why you were chosen." "Chosen for what?" Nathan shouted, his frustration boiling over. What the hell is this place? The monitor shifted, now displaying images of others, people Nathan recognized from the files and notes he had collected. They were sitting in the same chair, their faces twisted in fear or despair. The images flickered, showing their fates. Some were slumped over, unconscious or worse, while others screamed silently, their mouths open in terror. "This building is a testing ground," the voice explained. "A place to evaluate the limits of human endurance. Fear, isolation, paranoia, all carefully measured and analyzed. Many have failed. Few have reached this point. Fewer still have succeeded." Nathan clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "And what happens if I succeed?" The voice paused, as if considering the question. "You will join us. You will use what you've learned to contribute to a greater purpose." "And if I refuse?" Another pause. Then, the voice answered, cold and final, "There is no refusal, Nathan. There is only completion." Nathan felt his blood turn to ice. He turned toward the monitors, scanning the images for anything that might give him an edge. His eyes landed on a smaller screen tucked in the corner, showing a live feed of the hallway behind him. A shadow moved across the frame. He spun around, flashlight aimed, but the hallway was empty. The building's oppressive silence returned, amplifying his every breath. "You've been watching me this entire time," Nathan said, turning back to the room. "Setting me up. Manipulating me. Observing," the voice corrected. "Guiding. You have proven yourself resourceful, resilient, and capable. The traits we value most." Nathan stepped closer to the chair, examining its wires and sensors. His mind raced, searching for a way out. He wasn't going to let them win, no matter what it took. "Enough of this," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm not your experiment. I'm not your pawn." One of the monitors flickered, showing Nathan standing in the room at that very moment. But in the image, he wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him, its face obscured by shadows. Nathan spun around, but the room was empty. "Your fear will be your undoing," the voice said. Nathan gritted his teeth. "No. My fear is what keeps me alive." Without warning, he grabbed one of the wires connected to the chair and yanked it free. Sparks flew, and the monitors around the room glitched, their images distorting into static. The hum of the equipment grew louder, more erratic, as Nathan ripped another wire loose. "Stop," the voice commanded, its calm tone replaced with something sharper, more urgent. Nathan ignored it, tearing wires from the chair and smashing a monitor with the base of his flashlight. The room filled with the sound of alarms blaring and machinery whirring out of control. He turned toward the doors, ready to make his escape, but they were sealed shut. The metallic voice echoed over the chaos, "You cannot leave. Not now." Nathan looked around, his eyes landing on a small access panel near the wall. He sprinted toward it, prying it open with the flashlight. Inside was a mess of tangled wires and switches. Without hesitation, he began yanking at them, unsure of what they controlled but determined to disrupt whatever this place was. The lights flickered, and the alarms grew louder. The monitors flashed images of the building collapsing, the shadows growing longer and darker. Nathan could feel the building itself shaking, as though the very foundation was rebelling against him. Finally, the metallic voice faltered, its once authoritative tone breaking into static. Nathan stepped back from the panel, breathing heavily. The room was still lit, but the oppressive hum was gone. The double doors creaked open behind him. Nathan turned, gripping the flashlight tightly, and stepped through, ready to face whatever waited for him next. Nathan stepped through the open doors, entering a room vastly different from the others. It was expansive, cold, and unnervingly bright. Large windows lined one side of the room, revealing the city's skyline illuminated by the distant glow of streetlights. The air here was sterile, devoid of the musty decay that plagued the lower floors. At the center of the room was a long conference table, surrounded by sleek black chairs. It was out of place, too polished for a building that had otherwise been in shambles. On the far side of the room, a large screen flickered to life, displaying footage of Nathan's journey through the building, his entry on the first floor, his moments of hesitation, and the times he had been frozen by fear. Remarkable, isn't it? Nathan's heart skipped a beat at the sound of the voice. He turned toward it, his flashlight aimed instinctively, but lowered it when he saw the source. A man stood near the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. He was tall and well-dressed, his gray suit pristine, as though untouched by the chaos of the building. His face was sharp, with eyes that seemed to pierce through Nathan's defenses. "You've done exceptionally well to make it this far," the man said, his voice calm and measured. Nathan tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what the hell is this place?" The man took a step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. "My name is Richard Hargrove," he said, extending a hand as if they were meeting under normal circumstances. "And this place is my life's work." Nathan ignored the outstretched hand. "Your work? You mean this nightmare you've created? All the people you've lured here and tested like lab rats?" Hargrove smiled faintly, withdrawing his hand. "Lab rats, experiments, call it what you will. The fact remains, you are here because you have potential. You've survived what others could not. That alone sets you apart." Nathan shook his head, his anger boiling over. "You've destroyed lives, ruined people. For what? To see how much they can take before they break." Hargrove's smile faded. "To understand human resilience," he said firmly. "Fear, isolation, paranoia, these are the tools we use to uncover strength, to push boundaries. Those who succeed become something greater. Those who fail," he shrugged. "They were never meant to continue." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "And what happens to those who succeed?" Hargrove gestured toward the table. "They're given a choice. To join us, to use their strength and knowledge to serve a purpose greater than themselves. Or to leave and forget everything." "Forget?" Nathan asked, his voice sharp. Hargrove nodded. "The technology we've developed here allows us to ensure secrecy. If you choose to leave, your memories of this place will be erased entirely. You'll return to your life as though none of this ever happened." Nathan took a step back, his mind racing. "That's why you're still here." The tension in the room was suffocating. Nathan's mind screamed at him to act, to do something before Hargrove made his next move. His eyes darted to the screen on the wall, still playing footage of his every step in the building. Each clip reminded him of the dangers he had faced and the lengths he had gone to survive. "You think you've won," Nathan said, taking a step toward Hargrove. "And if I refuse both options?" Hargrove's expression darkened. "That would be unfortunate. We can't allow knowledge of this place to spread. If you refuse, you'll simply become part of the building. Like so many others before you." Nathan clenched his fists, his flashlight trembling in his grip. "You can't do this. People will find out. I'll make sure of it." Hargrove tilted his head, a trace of amusement returning to his face. "And how do you plan to do that? Everything you've seen, every piece of evidence you've gathered, it belongs to us now. Even if you make it out of here, do you think anyone would believe you? This building has been a ghost story for decades. A fiction. No one will listen to a man rambling about experiments and shadows. Nathan's thoughts raced. He felt the weight of the gravcorder in his pocket, the recordings of everything he'd witnessed. It wasn't much, but it was enough to expose the truth, if he could get out alive. "You've underestimated me," Nathan said, his voice steady. "I'm not like the others." Hargrove smirked. "I know. You think this ends here?" Hargrove raised an eyebrow, watching him with curiosity. "And what do you think happens next?" Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the chair nearest to him and hurled it at the screen. The glass shattered, sparks flying as the monitor short-circuited. Alarms blared instantly, and the lights in the room flickered. Hargrove's calm demeanor cracked. "You're making a mistake, Nathan," he said, his voice colder now. Nathan turned toward the doors, but they slammed shut before he could reach them. He spun back to face Hargrove, who stood motionless, his expression unreadable. "This place isn't just a building," Hargrove said. "It's alive. It knows you. It's watched you. And it doesn't let go." The floor beneath Nathan vibrated slightly, a low rumble that sent another wave of unease through him. The windows darkened as though the city lights outside had been swallowed by the void. Nathan moved toward the windows, looking for a way out. He wasn't going to let Hargrove trap him here. Not after everything he'd endured. "You can't escape," Hargrove said, his voice echoing eerily. "But you can choose. Stay and join us. Or leave and lose everything." Nathan pulled out the gravcorder from his pocket, holding it up for Hargrove to see. "You think you have control, but you don't. This is my proof. My way of ending this." Hargrove's smirk returned, though there was a glint of annoyance in his eyes. "You think a recording will stop us? You underestimate how far our reach goes." Nathan ignored him, turning back toward the table. He grabbed another chair and smashed it against one of the windows. The glass cracked but didn't break. He hit it again, harder, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "You can't run forever, Nathan," Hargrove called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. Nathan struck the window one final time, and it shattered outward. Cold air rushed in, and the city below came back into view. He climbed onto the windowsill, the gravcorder clutched tightly in his hand. "This isn't over," Nathan said, glaring at Hargrove one last time. Then he jumped. Nathan hit the ground running. He had landed on a lower rooftop adjacent to the building, the rush of adrenaline dulling the impact of his jump. The cold night air cut through him, and the distant hum of the city felt almost surreal after the suffocating stillness of the building. He clutched the gravcorder tightly, his fingers trembling but his resolve steady. He glanced back at the towering structure he had just escaped. The windows of the top floor were dark now, as if the building itself had gone dormant, biding its time. But Nathan knew better. Whatever force controlled the place, it wasn't done with him yet. The gravcorder was his only weapon, a lifeline that could expose the truth of what he had endured. But he also knew that Hargrove wouldn't let him leave unchallenged. Nathan took a deep breath and descended the fire escape, his movements swift but cautious. As he reached the street below, his sense of relief was short-lived. A black car was parked at the corner, its engine idling. Nathan froze, scanning his surroundings. Two men in suits stepped out of the car, their movements precise and deliberate. "There he is," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. Nathan bolted. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him as he weaved through narrow alleys and deserted streets. The gravcorder felt heavier in his pocket with every step, a reminder of why he couldn't stop. The men were relentless, their pace steady as they closed the distance. Nathan turned a corner and spotted an open doorway leading into an abandoned warehouse. He slipped inside, crouching behind a stack of old crates. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he listened to the approaching footsteps. "He went in here," one of the men said, his voice carrying into the cavernous space. Nathan reached for the gravrecorder, pressing the playback button. The familiar voices from the building filled the silence, the metallic tones of the announcer, the muffled screams of the subjects, and his own frantic narrations. The sound anchored him, reminding him why he couldn't give up. The men's footsteps grew louder. Nathan clutched the gravrecorder tightly and scanned the room, his eyes landing on a rusty ladder leading to a mezzanine above. He moved quickly but silently, climbing the rungs with care. From his vantage point, he watched the men enter the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Spread out," one of them said. "He won't get far." Nathan's heart raced as he made his way across the mezzanine, careful to stay out of sight. He spotted another exit on the far side of the warehouse, a door partially ajar. He waited for the men to move further into the space before descending the ladder on the opposite side. His movements were quiet, but every creak of the metal ladder felt deafening in the stillness. Reaching the exit, Nathan slipped through the door and back into the cold night. He didn't stop running, his mind racing with thoughts of how to get the gravrecorder's contents to someone who could help. The streets were eerily empty, the city feeling more like a ghost town with every turn Nathan took. He finally spotted a dimly lit cafe, its open 24 hours sign flickering in the window. The place was deserted except for a lone barista behind the counter. Nathan entered, his breath still uneven. The barista looked up, his face neutral but vaguely curious. "Rough night?" he asked. Nathan ignored the question, pulling out the gravrecorder and placing it on the counter. "Do you have Wi-Fi?" The barista raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Yeah. Passwords on the wall." Nathan pulled out his phone, connected to the network, and began uploading the recordings to an anonymous file-sharing site. His fingers trembled as he typed, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. The doorbell chimed as the cafe door opened. Nathan stiffened, his eyes darting to the entrance. A man in a suit stood there, his expression calm but menacing. "Mr. Carter," the man said, stepping inside. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble tonight." Nathan's hand hovered over the gravrecorder, but the man raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," he said. "Just hand over the device, and we'll pretend none of this happened." Nathan glared at him. "You think I'm stupid enough to believe that?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I think you're smart enough to know when you're out of options." Nathan didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed the gravrecorder and bolted for the back door of the cafe. He could hear the man shouting orders, the sound of hurried footsteps following him. The alley behind the cafe was narrow and dimly lit. Nathan sprinted toward the street, his pulse pounding in his ears. He ducked into another alley, pressing himself against the wall to catch his breath. He pulled out his phone, checking the upload's progress. 90%. Just a little longer. The sound of a car engine roared nearby, and Nathan cursed under his breath. They were closing in. He needed to buy more time. Spotting a dumpster nearby, he climbed onto it and hoisted himself onto the fire escape above. The metal groaned under his weight, but he kept climbing, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. Reaching the rooftop, Nathan crouched low, scanning the streets below. The black car was circling the block, its headlights cutting through the darkness. His phone vibrated, and he looked down to see the upload complete. Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. The sound of footsteps on the rooftop made him freeze. "You've been very resourceful, Mr. Carter, a familiar voice said. Nathan turned to see Hargrove standing a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back. Nathan's jaw tightened. How did you find me? Hargrove smirked. You didn't think we'd let you leave without a contingency, did you? The building has its ways of keeping track. Nathan gripped the gravcorder. It's over. I've sent the recordings. People will know the truth. Hargrove's smirk faltered, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. You think that will stop us? We've buried stories bigger than this. Your little upload won't make it past morning. Nathan stepped back, inching closer to the edge of the roof. Maybe. But it's out there now. And someone will listen. Hargrove's gaze hardened. You've made a grave mistake, Mr. Carter. Nathan didn't wait for a response. He turned and leapt to the adjacent rooftop, landing hard but rolling to soften the impact. He scrambled to his feet and kept running, the gravcorder still in his grip. Behind him, he heard Hargrove's voice call out, calm and chilling, "You can't run forever, Nathan." In the days that followed, a mysterious recording began circulating online. It detailed a man's harrowing journey through an abandoned building, complete with chilling audio evidence of psychological experiments and disappearances. The building itself became a focal point of renewed interest, but when authorities searched it, they found nothing, no equipment, no evidence, no sign of Nathan Carter. Nathan's name faded from the headlines, but his story lived on, whispered among those who sought to uncover hidden truths. And the building? It waited, silent and looming, ready for its next visitor.